The problem of the black people in America is inseparable from the problem of oppressed people all over the world. And until the uh, leaders of black America realize that our problem is inseparable from the entire international problem, we will be considered a minority, will be considered an underdog, and will be begging for the things that we should have had when we were born.
We're here for the 20th anniversary of Kuzaliwa. In other words, for the last 20 years, on Malcolm's birthday or a Saturday closest to it, we have done a conference, a one-day conference in his honor. We call that Kuzaliwa, which is Swahili word for happy birthday. We do it in his honor because of his importance to us. And this year we want to celebrate his leadership. What made Malcolm such a powerful leader? Why was he, of the many leaders that we have, why did he stand out as this powerful force that still affects us today? Young people who never seen him, young people who just heard about him, who just read his autobiography, really are affected by this man. Why? And what lessons can we learn from this? Now, we put our brother on a pedestal anyway. We honor him because of what he meant to us. And a lot of what he meant to us is personal. We all have the stories of what he did for us, with us, what we did because of him that haven't been told. His leadership was actually profound. His leadership was probably the most effective leader we've produced in the entire history. And I know that includes, it may include Marcus Garvey, it may include others, but the reality is that Malcolm stands out as the personality, the individual that affected most of our lives, probably more than any other single individual. So we do this in his honor every year, but most of the time we focus on something that we think he would like us to focus on. For example, we focus one year on independent education, black African independent education, and what that was. We focus one year on black people who publishers put together, and what their story is and how Malcolm influenced them. So each year we pick up. One year we talked about the intergenerational conflicts and in a way that we think Malcolm would have addressed that issue. This year we want to talk about his leadership. We know that leadership is a critical element in our community. We know that without leaders, without leadership, we really have a hard time finding our way as a people. We have a hard time understanding the issues uniformly. Leaders almost personify collectivity, the togetherness, working together. We talk about what they say as a way of communicating with each other. Malcolm had that effect. Dr. King had that effect. Marcus Garvey had that effect. All of our leaders have had that effect on us. They, in fact, connect us with each other. So we know leadership is extremely important. And what made Malcolm such a great leader? What made him this important person that we all recognize as this almost quintessential leader, almost archetypal? We couldn't say he was a perfect leader, but we can say he was a ideal leader. He had attributes that leaders need to be effective leader, and Malcolm was an extremely effective leader. So this year we want to look at those attributes. We want to look at it and we want to hear from other people, other leaders, people who've gone on to actually lead groups who was affected by Malcolm. So you'll hear these people. You'll hear these people. And all these people that you hear have been inspired by Malcolm. And we must understand, what do we mean when we say Malcolm? We mean Malcolm was a leader in the independence movement. He wasn't a leader that told us that our future is with white people, that our future is in this system, that we're bound are connected with this system. He's a leader that told us, no, our future is with ourselves. Our future is with each other. Our future is what we make of it as a group of people. That was Malcolm's message. And in fact, when you talk about his message, I think his message now, we can't gather because of this coronavirus situation. But one of the things that we learned from the coronavirus is that we as black people suffer more from the coronavirus than do other people. Well, you know, Malcolm would have pointed that out to us. Malcolm would have said, yeah, look at this. Look at our situation. Here we have a virus that's affecting everybody in the world, but it affects us more, which is so true. We have police brutality. We have economic woes. We have homelessness. We have drug abuse. We have all these other ills. They affect us more. The coronavirus situation simply points out to us again, we are still at the bottom. We are still affected more than anybody else. That was Malcolm's understanding of the reality, and that hasn't changed. But what has changed is that we don't have Malcolm in the way we had him before. We don't have the quality of leadership that we had when we had Malcolm. So the question becomes, how do we raise that? We just saw, for example, this brother, Ahmaud Arbery, who was killed in Georgia, points out again, two white men who hunt him down and shoot him on the street. This is the year 2020. This is the same thing that was happening when I was 10, 15 years old. Malcolm would have pointed that out to us.
And then the criminal who attacked the victim accuses the victim of attacking him.
Yes, sir.
This is American justice.
Yes, sir. That's right.
This is American democracy.
Yes, sir.
And those of you who are familiar with it
Yes.
know that in America, democracy is hypocrisy.
Right.
We're starting Kuzaliwa as we traditionally do with libations. We always start our program with libations because we want to pay tribute to our ancestors in the broadest context. We know the ancestors that we are specifically focusing on here is Brother Malcolm, but we have a lot of ancestors. So we also have a brother, a very distinguished brother in our community, a brother who is the chair, one of the co-chairs of our Council of Elders, who's a member of UBC, who actually does our libation every year, Brother Rasafika. He's another one of our long-distance runners. So we'll bring him up to do our libation.
Divine spiritual blessings of peace, love, power, humility, love, and cosmic African vibrations as we come together in the spirit of Brother Malcolm X, Al-Haj Malik al-Shabazz, to commemorate the 95th anniversary of his birth. So we want to give thanks to all the ancestors, the deities, and the Almighty Creator of the universe. So we pour libation in the name of those ancestors. So we call out the names of those ancestors, such as, of course, Malcolm X.
Moja.
Hmm?
I said Mamadou Lumumba Moja.
Yes, sir. Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, Henry Highland Garnett, Martin Delaney, Kwame Ture,
Betty Shabazz.
Betty Shabazz,
Mamadi Nayasuma.
Baba Oriefo,
Baba Ajay Koto.
Bo,
Baba Kwame Afo.
yes, sir. King Sagoon,
Sister Muriel Tillingham.
Shaka Musa Baran Shango,
John Henry Clark.
Mary McLeod Bethune, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman,
Gaston Neal.
John Coltrane, Sun Ra, Miles Davis,
Nina Simone.
Nina Simone, Pearl Daniels, my mother, Otis K. Daniels, my father, and Ruth Williams, my dearly beloved aunt. We give thanks to the Creator for all the wonderful blessings that have been bestowed upon us all these years and the legacies that our ancestors have left. We pay homage to them at this time on this commemoration, the 95th anniversary of Brother Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, Malcolm X.
I'm about to introduce you to Brother Peter Bailey, who is in our community in the Washington, D.C. area, or sometimes referred to as Banneker City. He is the individual who has had the most contact with our brother Malcolm. He literally worked with Malcolm, was a pallbearer of Malcolm, and can speak mostly to us more than anyone else about what it meant to interact with him on a personal basis, on a task basis, on a working basis. So I want to introduce everybody to Peter. Most of you probably know Peter or know of him. He'll tell you about his books. He'll tell you about his contact, and he'll tell you what message and what he got from our brother. So, Brother Peter,
Okay.
the rest is you.
Thank you, brother, for inviting me to participate in this. It's always a pleasure to celebrate Brother Malcolm's birthday. In fact, we had planned on having a major, big affair in D.C. this year because it would be number 95, and we had, of course, had to stop that because of what was going on. I thought I would present Brother Malcolm today on his birthday celebration. I'm going to talk about his leadership, especially in the international arena. But I thought before I got into that, I would just show you some photographs I have in my Malcolm X collection that provides a glimpse of him, you know, as a person, and what kind of person he was, and why this person became such a, had the ability to move people and to get people to action. And so I had a few pictures here I was just going to show you, just kind of explain what was going on. First of all, it's very important, especially on his birthday, that we think of Brother Malcolm as a father. People forget that he had eventually, 6 daughters, 2 who were born after the assassination. But this is a photograph of him with his 2 oldest daughters, Attila and Quibilla. This is a picture of the 2 of them with him, and you see Brother Malcolm. This is Daddy. This is Brother Malcolm as Daddy. I thought it'd be good for you all to see that. This is a photograph of Brother Malcolm in Harlem when he was lecturing, and Brother Benjamin, who was one of his top aides and who was the person who introduced him on that Sunday of the assassination to the audience. This is a picture of Brother Malcolm, and as you can see, Brother Benjamin, he's reigning, and Brother Benjamin is holding an umbrella over him while he's speaking. This is a picture of Brother Malcolm, again, in Harlem. There was a new, this is when franchise called Chock full of Nuts, which are the same status back then as I would say something like Starbucks has today. And Jackie Robinson, the great baseball player, had the franchise for one in Harlem on 125th Street and 7th Avenue. And this was the opening of that franchise, and Brother Malcolm was there along with Mr. Michaud, who owned the bookstore, the National Liberation Bookstore that Brother Malcolm spent a lot of time in. And Mr. Michaud said he used to go sometime and close the door and lock Brother Malcolm in there, and he'd be in there all night going through books in that book. That was my first experience with a black bookstore, was Mr. Michaud's books on 125th Street, and that's Jackie Robinson. Of course, later Jackie Robinson wrote some rather unflattering columns about Brother Malcolm because of Brother Malcolm's position on certain issues, especially his position. This is Brother Malcolm praying in Mecca. As you can see him, I want to show you, this is a picture of him. We know he was a Muslim, of course, and this is a picture of him in prayer. This is a picture of Brother Malcolm doing something a lot of people know. He's getting a haircut, and I thought I would bring it just to show you, especially for the young people to see that, you know him as a leader, you know him as a spokesperson, you know him, and you see him in that kind of way. But this shows him he had to also get a haircut every now and then. So this is Brother Malcolm getting a haircut at that time. Now, the next segment I'm going to talk about is Brother Malcolm. This is where he played a major leadership role, and that is in the absolute importance, which he believed critical, of a relationship, a strong, deep relationship between people of African descent around the world, especially people of African descent in North America and on the continent. This was his profound belief, and the last 15 months of his life, which is basically when I was involved with him, was around that, of him traveling to Africa. He made several trips to Africa. He spoke to Africa. I'm going to talk more about that as we go along, about meetings with African presidents and everything, and to push this thing of the absolute critical. The way I remember him show his ability to make things clear. The last article that I was the editor of our newsletter, and the last article he gave me on February the 20th, 1965, for the next issue of the newsletter, which never came out because of the assassination, in which he was explaining the necessity of that relationship. And he said that I can remember when I was a child growing up in Michigan, people used to say you don't have a Chinaman's chance. He said, well, they don't say that anymore since China became a force on the world scene. You don't hear nobody saying you don't have a Chinaman's chance, which meant at that time, whatever you were trying to do, there was no possibility of you doing it. You don't have a Chinaman's chance. And I remember as a kid growing up in Alabama hearing people use that kind of statement. But and as Brother Malcolm said, once China became a force on the world scene, they no longer had to deal with that. Nobody said that anymore. And he was saying that just as China provided protection for people of Chinese descent, no matter where they were, Africa as a continent should provide the same kind of protection for people of African descent. And that was he deeply believed that. And he made a major role in doing that and promoting that as a position. And it's also important to remember that Brother Malcolm came out of a Garveyite family. He came out of a Garveyite family. His mother and father were both Garveyites. And so it was not an accident that he had this kind of position, once he began to move into his own as a leader. This is a picture of Brother Malcolm in that international thing. This is a picture of him with Mohamed Babu, who was the Prime Minister of Tanzania. He came and spoke at one of our rallies in December of 1960. No, it was December of 1964. January of 1965, I'm not exactly sure, but it was right in that area. But he came and spoke at one of our rallies. And this is a picture of him and Brother sitting on stage before he went up to speak, in which he supported and praised Brother Malcolm for his strong Pan-Africanist position. And this is, of course, right here is a photograph of Brother Malcolm returning back to the United States after having traveled in Africa. This is him returning on one of his trips. Now, as I said before, Brother Malcolm strongly believed that it was absolutely critical that a serious relationship be developed between people of African descent in North America and people of African people on the continent. He strongly believed in this, and the whole last 15 months of his life was devoted to pushing that concept. As part of Brother Malcolm International strategy was to develop a strong relationship with Africa. And this is our newsletter, of which I was the editor. And we did 9 issues of our newsletter, and every single issue, all 9 issues, had included articles on what he was doing internationally. And I was saying, I doubt if anyone else at the time was covering him as closely as we were in our little newsletter like this, and except, of course, the FBI. They were keeping close tabs on what he was doing internationally. And this particular newsletter here, the photograph, shows Brother Malcolm as he was getting his Muslim name, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. We reported that in this issue of the newsletter. 2015, I had published a memoir about the experience of working with Brother Malcolm that I had during those last 15 months of his life. And I was the editor of the organization's newsletter. And here I had an opportunity to witness Brother Malcolm up closely, what a tremendous leader he was, and his ability to explain things to people and get people to make things clear as to what he was trying to do. And one of the most important things that he was trying to do was to try to set up a relationship, a strong relationship between African people on the continent and people of African descent especially in North America. And in that last year of his life, in May of 1964, Brother Malcolm went to Africa. And during his travels, he spoke and had audiences ranging from an hour and a half to 3 hours. Now listen, remember folks, we're not talking about, I see you at a reception, I shake your hand, I say hello, we maybe talk a couple, and then you move on. No, he had audiences ranging of an hour and a half to 3 hours with 6 African presidents. President Nasser of Egypt, President Ezekwe of Nigeria, President Nkrumah of Ghana, President Kenyatta of Kenya, President Toure of Guinea, President Nyerere of Tanzania, and Prime Minister Obote of Uganda. He had meetings ranging from an hour and a half with these brothers. They were treating him almost like he was a Secretary of State of African descent in this country to the continent. And as a result of that, he then received an invitation to come to the African OAU meeting, the second OAU conference, which is going to be held in June in Cairo. He went to the first one was held in Addis Ababa in 1963. The second was held in Cairo in 1964. Brother Malcolm was invited to that, not as a participant, but as an observer. And he went as an observer. While he was there, of course, he then issued a statement to the African leaders stating his position. And what he was trying to do was to get the African leaders to support his position that the United States was in violation of the UN Charter on Human Rights, the way black people were being treated, and especially at that time, between 1955 and 1965, when Brother Malcolm was on the scene, there were some horrific things going on in this country. People were being killed, homes were being firebombed, all kinds of things were going on. And the federal government was basically not answering unless it was absolutely pressured to. And it was pressured to internationally because it was involved in a propaganda war with Russia. And so that it only moved under that kind of pressure. As Brother Malcolm said in one of his speeches, they never moved because it was the right thing to do or was the moral thing to do. They moved only because of the international pressure. So he believed that one way to get this government to be more intervention or supportive of protecting black people's lives and property from the white supremacists and the racists was to have the United States taken before the UN and accused of violating the UN Charter on Human Rights. It's important to note, and most people are not aware of this, I'm sure, the United States to this day has not signed the UN Charter on Human Rights. And the reason they don't want to do it is because if they sign it, then an individual or a local group can go to the UN and take that position. If they don't sign it, then you have to get a UN member to take your case to the UN. So, of course, they had not signed it at this time, so Brother Malcolm was trying to get UN members to sign. And when he went to this thing in 1964 in Cairo, he issued a long, detailed paper to the Africans who were there, both the leaders of the countries who were there and to the press. He issued this long statement. And I'm just going to read a little bit of it just to show you what he was saying. He said, it's important to be aware of the context when reading statements issued by Brother Malcolm at the OU. Oh, that's me talking. And here's Brother Malcolm talking. Our problems are your problems. We have lived for over 300 years on the American in the American den of racist wolves in constant fear of losing life and limb. Recently, 3 students from Kenya were mistaken for American Negroes and were brutally beaten by the New York City police. Shortly after that, 2 diplomats from Uganda were also beaten by New York police, who mistook them for American Negroes. If Africans are brutally beaten while only visiting in America, imagine the physical and the psychological suffering received by your brothers and sisters who have lived there for over 300 years. That's what this is just part, it's a long statement which is included in this book, by the way, that he outlines his position to the Africans about why it was important that they become involved and support and have a mutual relationship between people on the continent and people in North America. And as a result of Brother Malcolm being there at this conference in 1964, the Organization of African Unity issued a statement, a resolution condemning discrimination in the United States. This was unheard of. This was unheard of. They issued this resolution. And that's in the book. I didn't bring it with me today, but it's resolved. You know, how you do resolve that type thing. They issued this resolution condemning discrimination in the United States. That was unheard of, and it really shook up the United States establishment, especially the CIA and the FBI. Now, the FBI had been wary of Brother Malcolm for a long time. Even back, I came across a statement in a book by a British writer named Anthony Summers on J. Edgar Hoover, in which Hoover is having a meeting with then Senator Lyndon Johnson. Now, since Johnson was a senator at the time, this means that it had to be before 1960, because Johnson became vice president in 1960. In that statement, Hoover said to Johnson, quote, "We wouldn't have any problem if we get those two guys fighting and we get them to kill one another off," end of quote. Those two guys were Brother Malcolm and Dr. King. That's the only mention of Brother Malcolm in Summers' book, about 500 pages. So that tells you that Hoover was watching these two brothers very early, so that before 1960. And then, of course, in an article that was in Ebony Magazine in 1962, when they talked about how the FBI was reaching out to get more black agents, the writer says that one of Hoover's favorite black FBI agents was a man named James Amos, who in 1921 infiltrated as an informant Brother Marcus Garvey's organization and supplied most of the evidence, quote unquote, that led to Brother Marcus being jailed on mail fraud. This is of course, this is what Ed J. Hoover, of course, one of his favorite black FBI agents. So you can see what the attitude of the FBI towards serious black leadership. And when they saw what Brother Malcolm was able to do, was able to get this kind of recognition, get invitations from meeting heads of state, not their aides, or meeting heads of state, being treated almost like a foreign minister, and then this resolution being given out and distributed. And by the way, in the FBI files, which I have, the FBI files on the OEAU, I came across, and I was reading it, United Press International, which was then like, you know, an international agency, something like Associated Press at that time, said that in the FBI file, they said that UPI did not report the issuance of this resolution by the Africans because they didn't want to enhance Brother Malcolm's reputation. So they did not even report about the issue of this resolution. That's why probably 99% of black folks in the country were totally unaware that the Africans issued a resolution this time. Now, of course, in our newsletter, we published it. We published the whole resolution in our newsletter. But it's these kind of things, brothers and sisters, I want you to understand is why we must understand that Brother Malcolm was an absolute total leader in this whole effort to develop a close relationship between people of African descent around the world, but especially people on the continent and people in what we always now call North America. He was very serious about this. He considered it the absolute essence of what he was trying to do during those last 15 months of his life. And because he was beginning to have some success in this arena, he was beginning to have some success. He was being invited to UN receptions. The Africans, in many instances, countries were treating him almost like he was a foreign minister of our people, you know, to the world. And I remember in that December 1964, when there was a big debate at the UN on the Congo, a big debate around the Congo, and during their presentations, 2 African UN diplomats from Guinea and from Ghana made a connection that they had never made before, and they made it because of the groundwork laid by Brother Malcolm. They basically said that if the United States had the right to intervene in the Congo, which they had done, England, U.S., and Belgium had invaded the Congo with the idea that they were like trying to save these nuns. I think it was some nuns who supposedly were under attack by these African savages. So that was why they went into the Congo. Of course, we know they went in there because the Congo's immense mineral wealth. They wanted to keep control of the Congo's immense mineral wealth. But because they said that because of that, and his ability to do that, that the U.S. government became very, very concerned about what he was doing and how he was doing it and how he was influencing people, and they began to start. What I believe, those were the things that they began to start planning. We got to get rid of this dude. We got to get rid of him. J. Edgar Hoover and the CIA and the New York City police, I think they were all involved in trying to get rid of him. I'm not going to be a lot of talk about the assassination today because, you know, this is a day of celebration. We want to celebrate Brother Malcolm as a leader. So we can talk about that at another time. But I just wanted to give you some background and show you why this brother did what he did, what he was doing, how important he was to that, and why we celebrate him. We celebrate him because he was a true leader, a true person who believed in us and who literally gave his life for us. And there's no better way than you can do. There's nothing better you can do on May 19th than to celebrate what would have been Brother Malcolm's 95th birthday. Thank you very much.
Now we've heard from the person in our community closest to Brother Malcolm, and I want to thank Peter for being here, and let's wish him all the health in the world. We hope that 20 years from now he's still with us, and that all of us who have had contact with Brother Malcolm, we are aged, because Malcolm would be 95, we're younger than he was, but that means we're also pushing growing older. So it's important to hear from those people who had contact with him. I'll talk about my own experiences at some point. But at this point I want to bring up something that I think a gentleman who I think feeds very nicely into what the message that Peter gave us about one of Malcolm's strongest emphasis. That is to say, building relationships between continental Africans and us here, and us in this experience. Relationships that relate directly to liberating our people, directly to freeing our people, developing a strong power base for our people. In our community, there's no greater example in that than the brother that I'm asking to come up now, Brother Kelechi Agwem, who was born in Nigeria, who has been with us for a long time, who's head of something called Appeal here. He's also a member of UBC, the sponsoring group for this agency. But he's one of these brothers who's so committed to his people that he has come and worked closely with us to build our future, to build our vision. So he's the best example of what Malcolm wanted to create. He's a younger brother. In fact, he's Dr. Kelechi Agwem. He can tell if he wants to about what his area of expertise is. But the important point for us is that he's in our midst. He works with us. We all have great respect for him. And I want him to come up now and tell us how he saw Brother Malcolm. What was his feelings about that, about Brother Malcolm, from a point of view of a brother who was born in Nigeria. So, Brother Kelechi Agwem, please.
Thank you, Robert Lumumba. Thank you for the introduction. Greetings. When I think of Brother Malcolm, I think of transformation. For many in my generation, Brother Malcolm was really the catalyst for our consciousness. I was born in Nigeria, spent my early formative years in Nigeria. when I came to the United States, I was probably your typical continental African in terms of my orientation. Just because you are born on the continent does not mean that you are Pan-African or black nationalist or even pro-black at that. It really took exposure to someone who happens to this, from my particular experience, see Brother Malcolm, to turn that light on. And I think Brother Malcolm served that role for many in my generation, regardless of where they were from or where they were. His life story and his teachings and especially his book really showed how one can transcend and transform one into their potential. It's like a butterfly in a cocoon. So many of us are in our chrysalis, but to transform into that butterfly, you need that catalyst. And for me, Brother Malcolm was that catalyst, as he was for many in my generation. And as a leader, there are many lessons that can be taken from Brother Malcolm. I think the one that comes to mind for me the most is selflessness. It's difficult to really demonstrate how selfless Brother Malcolm was, especially when you consider how much footage and archival footage, how many books are written about him. From an outside, you may see someone who liked to be in front of the camera, or who liked to be in front of the microphone, or something along those lines. But I see it differently. Brother Malcolm was someone who was committed to a cause, was willing to do whatever it took to achieve that cause, and support whoever was also committed to that same cause. There's a quote from Brother Malcolm that goes along the way of, I'm paraphrasing, that I will work with anyone regardless of who you are, as long as you're committed to defeating this juggernaut. He didn't use that term, that we're all working towards defeating, regardless of who you are. As long as you're committed to changing this system, to transforming our relationship with the system and bringing our people into victory, I'll work with you. That speaks to really the type of person he was. It wasn't really about who he was working with or who got credit for the work that was done, but it was that it had to be done. But he was also someone who was willing to step up if it needed to be done. He didn't necessarily need to wait for someone to do it. It just had to be done. And oftentimes that didn't necessarily put you in the best light with people that you even may have trusted and loved or wanted to like or liked you or whatever. It was often about, that task, that commitment to task, no matter what, or as he said, by any means necessary. And that's really about selflessness. It's about sacrifice. It's a very difficult skill to learn in leadership. They say with power, oftentimes corruption comes, or as they say, with more power, more corruption, if you will, in terms of our values. But in reality, it takes a special person like him to really be able to take the opportunity given to him to lead and focus on the job as opposed to himself. I mean, he did not amass, despite what certain people at the time he was alive may have thought or expected. He did not enrich himself despite opportunities to have done so many, many times over. He left very little of material wealth in his wake, but he left so much for us because of his sacrifice and his willingness to sacrifice and his commitment to the cause. He also stands as an example of manhood. He's an important archetype for manhood, for black men and men in general. I think that Brother Malcolm's archetype as a man is something that will be celebrated for millennia. There are many, many important leaders, thinkers, philosophers of our time. I think Brother Malcolm will surpass all of them in time, because I think the example that he set as a man, as a leader, as someone who was willing to literally travel the globe to find his people wherever they were and bring them together for that common cause of black liberation, Pan-Africanism, there is no parallel. So I think that because of that, he will his name will be spoken. We still have many, or a few, but still quite a large number who can say that they were able to be in his presence long after many of us who were not in his presence have passed. Long before this time, he will be remembered as being their archetype. I think that he's probably one of the most popular subjects for books. I mean, he's got so many biographies written on him, so many publications that are centered around him. I think that this will continue to grow because he's that important. The fact that when you are born into a situation, you don't relish in that situation, that you find a way to transform yourself out of that chrysalis into that butterfly you are intended to be that black man or black woman you are intended to be, regardless of the circumstance of your birth. The power of that transformation is resounding. I think there's something that many, many generations to come will appreciate, will emulate, and will propagate. I think that it's a seed that bears many, many fruit. So I think that's Brother Malcolm's legacy. I think as a leader, as a selfless, compassionate, because you need to be compassionate to be selfless. As a dedicated, self-sacrificing leader who is willing to work with your people regardless of where they are. And that's the other thing about Brother Malcolm. As he transformed, he didn't just sit there appreciating his transformation. He went back many, many times over to those same ghetto roads, those same clubs, those same areas where many so-called black leaders would not go to. He would go there over and over again because he himself was an example of transformation, and he knew that every one of these brothers and sisters, regardless of where they were at that time, had the potential to transform into their maximum potential. And that's a very powerful perspective to have as a leader. It's a very powerful tool if you're able to achieve it, which he did many times over. So I think as a man, as a leader, as a transformative figure, Brother Malcolm his name will be said and repeated many, many times into the next millennia.
Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
Okay, we're here. We're back at Kuzali. We're back paying tribute to our bright, black, shining prince, Brother Malik El-Shabazz, Brother Malcolm X, Kuzaliwa. One of the things, let me say, that we've been grateful, this city, Washington, D.C., or Banneker City, as it's sometimes referred to, has been graced with a number of very outstanding individuals in our movement. People who are what Sterling Brown has called long distance runners. People who've been around a long time, who have committed themselves to the message of Malcolm, the message of independence. One of these outstanding people is a sister out of Detroit who you're about to hear her poem in just a second as we bring her up. Is Sister Nubia Kai, who's an author of the book. I don't have her book present to me, but I'll get her to mention the book. A book about the Maroons, but Sister Nubia Kai, who is Dr. Nubia Kai is from the city of Detroit, a long distance runner, a independence. Her frame of reference, I would say, is the independence movement, the Republic of New Africa. Those people who understood that independence really, and they really at the core of Malcolm's message. So I would like to introduce to you today Sister Nubia Kai. Sister Nubia.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brother Baba Lumumba. And you also are a long distance runner who I really was influenced by in reading of your soul book. When you were called by another name that I won't mention, your slave name.
Yeah.
But I remember you, and that was I was certainly inspired by Soul Book, General Black Poetry, and other texts that were coming out. And one of the things about living in Detroit, we had the Dudley Randall, who had started Broadside Press. Broadside Press published a number of poets, Nikki Giovanni, Hakimata Budi, Sonia Sanchez. They all got their start. He also published Gwendolyn Brooks. But he did a collection called For Malcolm. It was a collection of poems dedicated to Malcolm X. And I was inspired by that collection of poetry to write this poem probably back in the 1970s. I used to ask my students when I was teaching at Howard, I was teaching a class called Blacks in the Arts. And I used to ask my students about an art form that they had experienced or encountered in which they were not the same person they were, before they experienced this particular piece of art. In other words, after experiencing this art, they were totally transformed as a person. They were not the same person. For me, it was two works of art, really. One of them was Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun, which I saw when I was a senior in high school. And I tell you, I was not the same person when I walked out of that theater after seeing A Raisin in the Sun. The other text was the autobiography of Malcolm X, which I read later. I was not the same person that I was before I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I hear this from many people, these same individuals, Lorraine Hansberry and Malcolm X, who incidentally were born on the same day, right? May 19th was their birthday. Malcolm X was exemplary in leadership because he was exemplary in his transformation. The impact that he had because he had transformed himself. And that is why he had the transformative power. Many of my students, those who had the opportunity to read, because I'm teaching in the 2000, 40 years after Malcolm's transition into an ancestor, many of them told me the same thing. It was the autobiography of Malcolm X that had transformed them, where they were not the same person. So Malcolm himself was like a living work of art. He was an epic narrative, a mythic hero, an epic hero. And in this poem that I'm writing, and I wasn't conscious of it, but he's depicted as a legend, as an icon, as an epic hero. So I'm going to share it with you now. Malcolm. Good men don't die. They stay around and take root in a cotton tree. And this tree grows in a field that is barren, but because it is proud and firm and strong, its very presence inspires the other sprouts to thrive and become great trees also. And when I speak to my children of you, Malcolm, this is what I will tell them. that you wore glasses and had a short crop beatnik beard, but you wasn't no beatnik, even when you beat Chicky Dick and old white Saint Nick. I will tell my children these things, that you were tall, a giant, not an ugly giant, a beautiful giant with sandy red hair and a boyish smile and even a few freckles. I will tell them this, and the legends will grow. I will tell them how you destroyed John Henry when you told him he was an Uncle Tom Negro for working himself to death for white folks who didn't give a hoot about him. And I will tell them, when you spoke, how your voice traveled all over the world. I will tell them how you raised the dead on the Statue of Liberty's carcass and lifted the motherland with your hand and brought her near to us. Think they'll believe me when I tell them, Malcolm, that you made it rain for us, that you were the rain that brought life to us? When we were dead as your father's burning flesh under a railroad track, dead as the men who murdered him, dead as your mother's mind went when she saw it. Shall I tell them how your words, quickened with the force of lightning, entered the holes of our heads and became seeds? See how we have grown in this barren wilderness of prairie and cactus and crushed Indian head skulls. See how we have grown out of the bloody sea, the stinking ships, the cotton fields. See how we have grown out of the dusty earth on the wings of the bars, perched high in our branches. I will tell them, you were Prince Shabazz, son of Elijah, Luqman, Prophet Muhammad, descendant of the line of Abraham, that you arose out of a mountainless forest, that you cleared a path for us and taught us not to fear the beast that roamed in its midst. You said, yes, animals are flesh and blood and can die just as we die. See how we have grown. Who didn't know the Aryan horn was made of glass, that we were dealing with a child warrior painting pictures on Sundiata's helmet. See how we have grown. Who didn't know our own fragile entrails were overcooked chitlins, till you showed us men were not flesh, but light born of Allah's morning. And on the morning of the great feast, on the singing hills where you walked and left this tomb, we will be free. One day our people will be free. Free as the bars, unharnessed from the American dollar bill and mounted on this hill. I will tell them, and the legends will grow like the shoots around the cotton tree. They will grow in these words, that you were a hewer of stone, a welder of nations, a maker of men, a master of self, a man with the spirit of the sun, that you were our teacher, our leader, our prince, and we will love you always. I will tell my children these things, and they will listen.
Good morning. My name is Carla Wynn, and I am the Public Relations Director for ADASI, the African Diaspora Ancestral Commemoration Institute, checking in today to reflect on the meaning of El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz Malcolm X. One of the things that I appreciate about him is that he was constantly learning. Malcolm X is a scholar. He is a humanitarian. He is an educator. A lot of people don't think about him in that term because they think about the political about him. But what I really appreciate about Malcolm X is that he is committed to a cause. And once he learns new information, he imparts that information. He challenges a way of thinking. He encourages us to grow. He was constantly on a quest of personal development. And whenever he obtained new information, he shared that information with his audiences. he was honest, he had integrity, and he was never afraid to admit whenever he had something wrong. So that was one of the things that I appreciate about Malcolm X. Another thing is that he is a scholar. He embraced literacy early on in life, and although there were forces against him who were trying to make it seem as if he could not be who he wanted to be, granted he was not able to become an attorney because of the forces against him at the time and some things that happened in his life, he was an attorney because he was able to defend the cause. He may not have legally practiced law or been able to go to law school, but he was constantly on a path to learning. He embraced religion, but not only in a spiritual sense, but also the practical application of religion through the Nation of Islam and expanding that once he more fully embraced Islam. Another thing I appreciate about Malcolm X and how he influenced me is to love myself. As an African person, 500 years removed from the continent of Africa, still on a quest to discover who she is, he fully embraced his Africanness and placed blackness in the center of his growth and development. And that's another thing that I really appreciate about him. He constantly had books on him. In fact, my house is practically a library. So I can say that is an attribution to him and also to my parents, who encouraged knowledge and learning and understanding. And another thing I really appreciate about him is his love of women and his respect for women. So those are just a few notes that I had to share about what Malcolm X means to me on a personal level, how he has influenced my life, and how he has also influenced me to be able to assist other people in terms of helping them to reach their goals, dreams, and aspirations. Thank you so much.
All right, here we are still celebrating Kuzaliwa, celebrating our brother Malcolm, celebrating what he meant to us as a leader, and bringing outstanding leaders in our community to you to talk about what he meant to them, of course. We'll come to the segment where we have members of our spiritual community, members of, or sometimes referred to as our cultural community, people who practice African traditional religion, people who are follow the dictates of their ancestor, our ancestors, and use that as the guide for their life. The first person that we want to introduce in that regard is Nana Kwaku Kar, who has been around this community for many years, who's with, we call the Temple of Nyamedua, and he's going to give you his feelings about Brother Malcolm and about what he meant, what Brother Malcolm meant to him. So, Brother Kwaku, Nana Kwaku. All right.
First of all, I would like to say thank you, Baba, for introducing me. I would like to say greetings to everyone. It is an honor for me here to also be here to help celebrate a great man. One of the things that we have to think about that always come to mind when I think of him is that no matter what your religion practice, keep it in the closet and come out and be the man or woman that you are. I began the journey in the civil rights era back in the 1960s, which tells you I'm a pretty old man now. However, I was not become familiar with Brother Malcolm until the 70s. And at that time, you have to understand, I had gone through a number of changes. But one thing that made me understand him and appreciate him more than anything, for he was a man of integrity. If we are going to serve our community, two things have to take place. We have to be men and women of integrity and follow the truth. Malcolm lived the truth as well as integrity. One of the things that stand out for me with Malcolm is Malcolm knew about how to work in community, how to work in small towns, how to work in big cities, how to work with different organizations and still be who you are, but still know we must work together if we're going to change the climate that we're in. We're in a climate now that Malcolm talked about. It doesn't require a person with a PhD, or any degrees. If you believe in your people, if you believe in yourself and made a change in yourself and know that making changes will change the society that we live in, that is what Malcolm stood for. Malcolm did not allow anyone to dictate to him. He was a self-learned man. Well, what does that mean? He was a doctor. I'm talking about DOC doctor, not a DR doctor. He was one, when you saw him in the community, you had respect for him, and he had respect for you. At this time, we must honor this great man and never let his name go down. We have a saying in Akan say, as long as someone call your name, you're never dead. This is an example of that truth. We say to Malcolm today and tomorrow, Malcolm, we're here with you. We're going to do the things that you've taught us to do, and we will forever call your name, Madasi.
Okay, we had just heard from Brother Nana Kwaku Carr. Now we have another outstanding member of the spiritual community in this area, Sister Ncio Perry, who was with Onipa, who's been a really stalwart in understanding kind of one of the fundamental messages that Malcolm put forth. That is to say that we have to be ourselves. We can't be others. The strength, I think, one of the greatest strengths of our community, the cultural and spiritual parts of our community, is that we look for a way of life that follows our own ancestors, our own definition of ourselves, which is one of Malcolm's core messages. The brother, underneath all he talked about was one of the ideas that he presented was, we as a people have to be ourselves. So Nana Ncio Perry will come up and give us her take on what Brother Malcolm meant to her and her life. All right, Nana.
Greetings all. I remember when Baba Lumumba mentioned this topic, and I thought about it then. It was clear and succinct to me then as it is now, in terms of speaking on what El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, known to us all most lovingly as Malcolm X, means to me, but more importantly, what his life, what his being on this planet meant to me. And very succinctly, for me, Malcolm X is a perfect example of a person who, on several occasions, was asleep and under someone else's control, who awoke each time and evolved to a higher level of consciousness and the clarity on his mission. He started off as Malcolm Little, whose mission was about self and self-hate. Then he evolved to Malcolm X, whose mission was about raising the level of consciousness and awakening others to their self-love and ultimately to unity. And from there he evolved to El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, whose mission was to form the Organization of Afro-American Unity for the purpose of, and I want to quote it, uniting everyone in the Western Hemisphere of African descent into one united force, and once united on Western Hemisphere to unite with the brothers of the motherland, Africa. Whenever I read that or hear that, I'm just overwhelmed with the possibilities and expectation of that mission which is yet to occur. Once awakened, no matter what the obstacles may have been, even threats to his life, Malcolm X never faltered. He continued on his mission. He knew we had to come and love ourselves, and then we had to come and love each other, And then we had to come together, and not only here where we live, but all over the world. He never faltered. That evolution, that raising of consciousness, gave me the courage and impetus to do it on my own. I was only 4 when Malcolm started preaching for the Nation of Islam after he came out of prison. And I was 17 when he was assassinated. During that period of my life, like many of us, I was being Americanized. Not Africanized or culturalized, but Americanized. Then I went on to college where the Americanization continued, because now they're socializing me to become and fit into America. However, it didn't go quite as planned. Because during the time when I was college, we discovered, we awakened to the fact and evolved to the fact that we were black and proud. So we began to do the things that black people do, which was to speak of things that were of blacks in a positive nature. At this point in my life, I didn't know yet that I was African, but I was black, and I was indeed very proud. When I left college and moved to Washington, D.C., it was here that my awakening to my Africanness occurred. It was its own journey that led me to become an Akan priest, because I realized I was more than just African. I was indeed connected to the Creator, a spiritual being having a human experience. That made me think again about Malcolm X. And I thought about his awakening, being guided by his understanding that he too is a spiritual being, having a human experience. Sure, he may have called his Creator a different name. He may have done different rituals and things to acknowledge it, but he too realized that there was a power greater than us that connected all of us. And if we tapped into it, we would move on the road to being all that we were meant to be. I think that I have spoken to what that is, just clear and succinct. Evolution. Being who we are. Being truly who we are. I had a quote that was spoken right to what Baba, when he introduced me earlier, would have spoken just to that. Just understanding that we have to live our culture. We have to be ourselves. But once we've done that, we have to live our mission. And it's okay to evolve continuously. It's okay. He gave us permission to do that because we saw it happen with him. One of our greatest leaders, we saw it happen with him. We have permission to continue to evolve. We're not stuck in a place that does not define us. What can we say? But up, mighty race, we must accomplish what we will. And with Malcolm X and other great leaders continuing to speak to us, continuing to guide us, we will. Thank you, Baba, for this opportunity.
Who are you? You don't know. Don't tell me Negro, that's nothing. What were you before the white man named you a Negro? And where were you? And what did you have? What was yours? What language did you speak then? What was your name? It couldn't have been Smith or Jones or Bunch or Powell. That wasn't your name. They don't have those kind of names where you and I came from. No, what was your name? And why don't you now know what your name was then? Where did it go? Where did you lose it? Who took it? And how did he take it? What tongue did you speak? How did the man take your tongue? Where is your history? How did the man wipe out your history?
Okay, we're back. Kuzaliwa 2020. celebrating our brother Malcolm, looking at his leadership. One of the things that Malcolm's leadership provided for us was inspiration across the board. So it wasn't just political inspiration, it wasn't just cultural, it was also entertainment. It was also a broad spectrum of people were affected by what the brother's leadership. It was just a broad spectrum of people. And today with us also we have Brother Doc Powell, who started a group in 1975 called what? The Malcolm X Drummers and Dancers. Now the Malcolm X Drummers and Dancers are a group that we use quite a bit during Kwanzaa here. They're come almost a mainstay of our Kwanzaa activities in DC, and you know, they go back, you know, Doc is a man of my generation, a man who, so, you know, today we want to not only hear his drumming, but we want to listen to what he felt about Malcolm. So, Doc Powell.
Teenagers, as we usually are on that age. I wasn't sure about Brother Malcolm X, where he was coming from. But my Uncle George, he was one of the leaders of the United African People's Organization in Atlantic City, New Jersey. He was also captain of the fire department in Atlantic City, New Jersey. I remember sitting on the bench out in front of the fire department. I said, Uncle George, what's this guy Malcolm X all about? And he explained it to me. He's for the people. He's a beautiful speaker.
He's an example of manhood, Malcolm X. So, always liked my Uncle George and always appreciated what he would say and his opinions about things. So I, really got a great type of curiosity about the brother Malcolm X. So I read his autobiography 3 times. I said I read his autobiography 3 times. After reading about his life, I said, man, that's the guy I want to be like. Just like him. Coming up strong, coming up with a lot of problems and issues, straightening out his life and being a beautiful community organizer and a beautiful speaker, and just somebody contributing to African liberation. That's what I wanted to do. So when I came to Howard University in Washington, D.C. and started working for groups like Concerned Citizens of Central Cardozo and Youth Pride Incorporated, Marion Barry's group before he got into politics, citywide group. I was one of his main coordinators there. I said, wow, this is, I'm trying to do what Malcolm, I think, would want me to do. But I was kind of frustrated in some of these organizations, they weren't exactly, what I wanted them to be. So I said, well, how can I make my life and have a contribution to African liberation? What is the best way I can do that? So I decided I started doing some drumming. Doing the thing that I was doing since I was 6 years old. When my mom bought me a pair of bongos, because she was tired of me beating on the furniture all the time, bought me a pair of bongos, I wore them skins out. I went down to Chicken Bone Beach in Atlantic City and got with the brothers from Philly on Sunday and learned something about drumming from them, and came to Washington, D.C. and got in this wonderful drumming community here in D.C. with Baba Ngoma and Barnett Williams, and Amadi Nasuma, and Abu Kunta, and Baba Aziz, and all these great drummers that was hanging out here in Malcolm X Park. And all of a sudden, somebody said, man, we sounding good, let's do some shows and whatnot. Well, I wasn't the lead drummer on the organizer of some of them shows, but then I started doing it. I started putting my group together. I said, well, what should I name this group? Let me see what I can name this group. And I said, well, Brother Malcolm, that's the man that, I really identify with, so let me call it the Malcolm X Drummers and Dancers. The Malcolm X Drummers and Dancers. The Malcolm X Drummers and Dancers.
Listen to Brother Doc Powell with his stirring rendition of Malcolm's effect on his life. And we have now another brother who is a long-distance runner in our community. Brother Imamu has been serving our people within the context of Malcolm's philosophy, that is to say, the philosophy of independence, the philosophy of self-reliance that Malcolm stood for. He's been serving our community for many, many years, and he too has a story about how Brother Malcolm affected him. Brother Imamu is head of the African Freedom Fund Treasury. He's a member of UBC. He's a long-standing member of the UNIA. He had his own group many years ago that he may tell you about. And he has been deeply affected by the leadership qualities of my Brother Malcolm. So without saying anything more, Brother Imamu Bakum, or Imamu Kaumba, I'm sorry, but Imamu Kaumba,
Yeah.
Brother Imamu.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Brother Malcolm, his influences were many. Let me say this first. I didn't know anything about Malcolm X until, I guess, 1968 when I went in the military. I heard about Malcolm. In fact, I remember vividly the day that he was assassinated because I was home and my uncles and my father, we was all sitting around watching TV that time. I think we were watching the basketball or the news or something. And they stopped the program and said, we got a broadcast about the assassination of Malcolm X. And I said, wow, what is, I think I was about 15 years old, and I'm wondering what is this all about? And I remember my uncle saying he was messing with them white people or something like that. And I said, well, what? I didn't know. But anyway, to make a long story short, I became very familiar with Malcolm in the military because we used to have rap sessions in 1968. We were talking about different ways of black people freeing themselves or freeing ourselves. And we had one brother from New York. He was, he knew Malcolm very well, Brother Smitty. And we had another brother named Brother Barnes in Kansas City. And he loved the Black Panther Party. And and by him, Brother Smitty, talking about the differences between Malcolm or the similarities between Malcolm and the Panthers, I began to understand what it was all about. But one of the biggest influence Malcolm had on me was Malcolm. I thought Malcolm was one of the greatest orators of all time. I mean, he had very tremendous oratory skills. And I loved the way Malcolm articulated his words, and it all made a lot of sense, you know. And I think that was one of the first things that I noticed about Malcolm, how he used his oratory skills to galvanize and educate our people. Another feature that I love about Malcolm is his organizational skills. Malcolm and I learned that Malcolm X, John Henry Clark, Reverend Albert Clegg, Gloria Richardson, and others helped develop the OAAU in 1964, the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And from what I understand, Malcolm was the general architect of that, but he did, it was mentioned that he wanted to, the organization to be, how was the word, done the same way the OAU was done, which was done a year before the OAAU. And Malcolm said that he wanted it to fit the very letter and spirit of the OAU. And the OAU, as we all know, was the galvanizing and organizing of the African nations on the continent, many who were newly becoming independent at that time. And Malcolm felt that we needed to have that here in the United States. And as a result of the OAAU, that was the transition to the unity of communities in this country, and organizations and individuals and families and groups coming together in solidarity and unity. And I thought these were some of the great features that Malcolm left us with. And also, I can't forget this, Malcolm is a family man. You know, he loved his children, loved his wife, loved his family. And I think that those ingredients is enough for us to organize and galvanize and do the things that Malcolm had put on the table, the blueprint, so to speak, that is still there, but we have to put the blueprint in motion organizing, solidarity around communities. So these and more are some of the things that I really, really love about our brother Malcolm. So we thank you for that.
I still believe the best thing for us to do is go back home to Africa. But while we're getting ready to go back, we've got to eat now, we've got to sleep now, we have to have some clothes now, our children have to go to school, and we need some place to work. So whatever kind of action program can be devised to get us the things that are ours by right, then I'm for that kind of action no matter what the action is.
All right, we now have one of the bright lights in our community, a young brother from Florida, who has graced this community with his presence and made a tremendous contribution. And he tells me that Malcolm was one of his inspirations. And when you see a younger person who was inspired by the same person you were inspired by, and who wants to talk about that, it warms your heart. Brother Kaba is known in this community as he's an entertainer himself. Brother Kaba is a soul singer, and he's also the host of African Deep Thoughts, which comes on a popular radio station, WPFW, in this area. We're grateful to have his presence, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how Malcolm influenced his life and what he thought of the leadership and how it affected him. And then, that's what we want. We're looking for the personal touch, especially from young people, as to what this man, this giant of a man that inspired us all has done for us. So, Brother Kaba.
Greetings, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with Baba Lumumba's request. I feel honored anytime I get a chance to talk about Baba Omowale, Baba Malcolm X, one of our great shining lights, our black shining prince. I was first introduced to Malcolm actually while I was in the military. It was around that time when I was pretty much out of high school, and the movie, Spike Lee's movie, was about to come out, and I got a hold of a 1972 edition of the autobiography of Malcolm X, as told to Alex Haley by an older brother that I knew in the military who was in and out of the Nation of Islam, and I had never experienced anything like Malcolm X. I had never experienced anything like seeing somebody transform his life. This was something new to me because where I grew up, we did not have a lot of black consciousness or African consciousness. So much of the stuff that I came in contact with was really more, just kind of piecemeal here and there. I pick up something here and pick up something there. I would hear stuff in rap music and Public Enemy and X-Clan, and I would hear all these different references. But because we don't have a black bookstore, even to this day where I'm from, because the black population is very small, and we don't have a cultural community where I'm from, I did not have a reference to kind of go back to it, at least like some people do in some of the bigger cities where they could go to certain places and know where there are certain brothers and sisters that are talking a certain kind of way and a certain kind of black politics. I didn't have that. So all I had was the rap music, kind of introduced me in a very peripheral way. So when I got a hold of the book, the Malcolm X autobiography, it really changed my life in a way that nothing has before or since, really. I got a chance to see that a black man could be resolute, could be black, could be strong, and can change the world. And he really gave us an example of what the potentialities that lie in all of us as black people, lied in Malcolm, because this is a person who endured all kinds of tragedies in his life. Of course, we know about his father being murdered by white terrorists, and of course that kind of threw his family into disarray, and then of course himself into disarray, and to see the depths that he sunk to, and then was able to come out of was exceptional. Of course, he had some experience with his own family being Garveyites and so forth. But Malcolm X was just a phenomenal person, and this, I never saw him live. I wasn't alive when he was around. I was born about 8 years after he was killed. So I was, but his name was still alive, as I said before, through the hip hop music, and it was just they kept his name alive and kept his name alive, and it was just there. So when I got a chance to read the book, I just fell into it, and it was just amazing to hear him in his own voice. And then I got a chance to actually buy some tapes, several tapes. I think I got it from the military bookstore of all places, which is crazy. I got some books on him, Malcolm, some of his speeches that were written in book form, also from a military bookstore, which was, kind of amazing now that I think about it. But I was able to read the words, and then I was able to actually listen to the tapes and follow along with the tapes and fill in the gaps, because some of the tapes, had spaces in it. So, the text a lot of times had the whole speeches in them. And just the fearlessness of Malcolm and knowing who he was and knowing who our enemies were. And he was just so resolute and so strong. And I had never seen anything like that before. And as a young black man in America, even in the military, it just filled in a lot of blanks. Malcolm X on Afro-American History is another book that I got, where he talked about, it was different compilations of speeches where he talked about our history and about how we go way back and how we built the first civilizations and all of these things. And he was able to back up everything that he was able to say. And then I got a hold of some debates that he would do with different people, black and white, and how this man who basically only had an 8th grade education, only completed the 8th grade, was able to just shut down scholars all over the world, and nobody could touch him. And so very often they would have 3 or 4 people against him, and he would still just smash them. So and he would just do it with just with ease. It's almost like swatting flies away. It was just amazing to see that. And he wasn't angry. He didn't jump up and call them names. He just very calmly just dismissed them and just refuted everything that they threw at him. So it was a beautiful thing to see. And that really influences me even to this day. So I had never seen a black man talk to white people like that. I had never seen a black man, just totally refute white people, not be concerned with being accepted by white people. And it was very clear, and he was very comfortable in it. It wasn't even it wasn't a show. It wasn't somebody. Sometimes people go overboard. It was very it was very sincere. It was very real. And so to see that embodied in me, and planted in me that same kind of energy, I at least aspire to be in that way, and then to be able to pass that on, to my children and other generations. That's what he means to me. He means strength. He means power. He means fortitude. He means commitment to his people. He was very committed to his family, to his wife. And reading about some of the words that his wife even wrote about him in a book called Malcolm X, As They Do Him, that was edited by Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Different people talked about different aspects of Malcolm, and his wife talked about him as a husband and father. That really influenced me as well as a husband and father, that as fierce as Malcolm was out there, as I was just talking about, dealing with our enemies and dealing with some of the lapdogs of some of our enemies that looked like us. I had a certain perception of Malcolm as just being only the warrior, only the fighter. But when you read the things that Betty Shabazz said about him, Dr. Betty Shabazz said, he used to leave her poems that he wrote himself and love notes and love letters. So I'm like, wow, this is Malcolm X, the warrior, but yeah, he was a man, so you can be a man, you can be a fighter and fight out there in the streets with our enemies and take on our enemies, but you don't bring that in the house. In the house, you become, a man. He was his wife's boyfriend. He was his wife's lover. He would literally write her love letters to the point where anytime he traveled a lot, and she said that every time he left, she used to tear the house up trying to find love letters, because he would leave her clues and leave her money and say, well, look here, you might want to look over there, or you're hot, or this and that. You'd never think Malcolm X was that type of person. And yet that was Malcolm X, So it really helped me in my own marriage to be like, okay, I can actually, be my wife's boyfriend. I can actually write her love letters and be affectionate and all those things. And obviously he was affectionate. He had $6. So so obviously that transcended. So he was a complete man. And Malcolm embodied an energy that our enemies could never kill, even though they thought they could, in somebody like him, because he was still able to inspire somebody like myself who wasn't even alive when he was around, because he embodied an energy that resonates in the spirit, deep in the spirit of all black people. And that's why Malcolm X will never die. Peace.
Okay, we're back here. We're celebrating Kuzaliwa. We're talking about our brother Malcolm again, and our next guest to bring you some of his personal experiences is another outstanding brother in our community, Dr. Jawara Hunter, who has been around for many years. If I'm not mistaken, he's out in New York. He can correct me if I'm wrong. And he's going to tell us about his feelings about Malcolm's leadership and how we might be able to incorporate those wonderful qualities that this brother brought to all of us in our own lives. Dr. Hunter.
Thank you for the invitation, Baba Lumumba. This is a very important piece of work that you're putting together. And thanks for inviting me. Only a few things to say about Malcolm. I know a lot of things can be said about him. My points are going to be basically four. His passionate love of us as a people, his ability to motivate and the motivation that he's provided for those who were around him at the time as well as future generations, his incredible intellect, his ability to analyze and the scope of his thinking, as well as his never-ending commitment to our struggle. So I think that any leader has to have, extreme passion about what they're doing, because leadership is always challenging, of course, and going against the grain, as you know Malcolm always was doing, made it even more difficult. He was under observation, under surveillance for many years. He had lots of internal and external foes, but his passion was that, black folks needed the best of him, and he provided that all the time. I know he had challenges that we'll never understand how deep they were, but even that was undaunting to him. He provided his leadership without any sort of fear or stepping back, what have you. Malcolm provided motivation for his people around him, which is an extremely important leadership concept. The notion being that a leader can only lead folks who they're able to motivate and inspire. He did this because of his incredible oratory and also because of his incredible charisma. He was a tall, handsome gentleman, and he had studied immensely, and he knew his subject matter very well. He also knew his people very well, which of course is important to how to motivate them. Most black folks today, as well as then, were absolutely intimidated by the sheer strength and power of the overarching society, as well as their ongoing ability to organize violence against us. He had to take that into consideration and be the model of leadership that showed that even though you might have an incredibly strong enemy, that having the notion that what you're doing is correct and honorable and within the realm of possibilities, that you just move forward regardless. Next, Malcolm's intellect was pretty much in a class by itself. Having not formally gone, quote-unquote, to the finest of colleges and universities, he was able to debate without any problem those who were, formally trained in debate, formally trained in the academy. His ability to analyze situations on the spot belied his incredible ability to remember things that he had learned. Of course, the notion that he had actually read the dictionary while he was in prison, and he read 3 to 4 or 5 newspapers every day before he would go and encounter the community. And the scope of his thinking, of course, is something that Peter Bailey talks about, the notion of tying our struggle to an international struggle. Malcolm, of course, said, you know, you don't go to your enemy's court to try your case, you take your enemy to court. So his notions of going to the world court as well as engaging African national leaders was, at that point, revolutionary. And the last part I think I just want to comment on is the fact that he did all of these things. His commitment was so strong, and he made the comment, of course, at his eulogy by Ossie Davis, he was our black shining prince, that he carried with him his people everywhere he went. He carried with him his concerns, and his commitment to his people is now legendary, and he has continued as a martyr to inspire millions of people around the world, and I don't think that will stop anytime soon. I thank you very much for this opportunity to make a few comments about Malcolm, who I of course adore and has been a major part of my growth into manhood. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we want to bring Brother Rasafiq, who did our libations, back to present his view of Malcolm. Brother Rasafiq is the co-chair of the Council of Elders. He's a member of UBC, the group that is actually doing this, and we want to hear from him on his view about Malcolm X.
It's indeed an honor, privilege, and pleasure to be here on this auspicious occasion as we honor Brother Alhaji Malik El-Shabazz, Brother Malcolm X, a model for black leadership. A great black leader has clear vision, courage, intelligence, integrity, honesty, humility, and sharp focus. He articulates identity, purpose, direction, and specific goals and objectives. A great black leader exemplifies black culture and is quite knowledgeable about black or African people. Brother Malcolm X clearly possessed those pristine qualities. He very powerfully demonstrated a unique style of black leadership as a true model of political, social, and economic achievement. He selflessly loved black people with a strong sense of commitment, dedication, fearlessness, vigilance, and fortitude. He was indeed a charismatic and eloquent spokesman for black nationalist Pan-African ideology. He was, as Ossie Davis proclaimed at his funeral, our shining black prince, our model not only for black leadership, but also for black manhood, as a black husband and as a black parent. He was profoundly instrumental, among other luminaries, like Marcus Garvey, Martin Delany, and Haile Henry Garnett, to name a few, in shaping and defining our quest for liberation, freedom, and justice. He possessed great revolutionary and organizational attributes. He was a critical thinker, master teacher, dynamic orator, and skillful debater. Brother Malcolm strongly believed in black unity, black pride, black redemption, black women, black self-defense, and black self-preservation. He was a proponent of black cultural and educational revolution and black classical music, for some known as jazz. He spoke very highly of the great black musician John Coltrane and attended some of his concerts. Likewise, Train attended some of his lectures. They both are such endearing ancestors of light, love, and deep appreciation. Brother Malcolm was the spark, the impetus, the catalyst, the true inspiration that put me personally on the path of revolutionary thought, action, and commitment to the liberation of African people in all aspects of my life, politically, socially, economically, and spiritually. He was indeed the black Messiah, and I will always be truly indebted to him as a divine, revolutionary, and cultural force of reason, truth, and black excellence, as he so forcefully proclaimed, by any means necessary. Long live the wonderful, beautiful, powerful African spirit of Alhaji Malik El-Shabazz, Brother Malcolm X, a true eternal model of African leadership, dedication, righteousness, and spirituality. Sati Sana. Peace and blessings.
Personally feel that my personal problem is never solved as long as the problem is not solved for all of our people in this country. So I remain Malcolm X as long as there is a need to protest and struggle and fight against the injustices that our people are involved in this country.
Thank you, Baba Lumumba. Thank you, Umoja House, for hosting this very special occasion of Kuzaliwa in honor of the birthday of Malcolm X. El Hajj Malikio Shabazz, our black shining prince. Malcolm X always had a huge and profound impact on me ever since I was a high school student when I first started reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. And then when I was in college and I was organizing for the Republic of New Africa and I found out that Brother Imari was inspired by Malcolm X, hey, that just made my day. I mean, I would learn that Malcolm X would say, if the Henry brothers ever need me, all I have to do is hop on a train and I'll be right there whenever they call me. The Henry brothers was none other than Brother Imari Obadeli and his brother Guy Eady, also known as Richard and Milton Henry. And so when Malcolm was in a hotel one time and Brother Imari was in there, and Brother Imari told me that Malcolm was talking about nation building, he was talking about the future and a vision. But then he was assassinated, and Brother Imari said that he felt lost, and he felt empty, and what was the nation going to do? And then he said it struck him. Malcolm left a blueprint. Malcolm left a plan, and what Brother Imari did was take 3 principles from Brother Malcolm's teachings: internationalization, independent land, and self-defense, and he welded it into it melded into what he called the Malcolm X doctrine. And that doctrine helped to bring about the Black Government Conference on March 31st, 1968, which was the founding of the Republic of New Africa. And, again, the impact that Malcolm had, we listen to message to the grassroots today. We would not be able to hear that today had it not been recorded. And who was it recorded by? That speech was recorded by one of the Henry brothers, Milton Henry, Guy Eady, Brother Imari's brother. Again, the impact was profound. And, we want to just make sure that this legacy continues on. And after I graduated from college, I began teaching in an independent black school, Nation House Watoto school, and I used to teach the children. I used to teach the Watoto about our famous black heroes and heroines, and I taught them about Malcolm X, and I taught them about Malcolm X through verse. And part of the verse, the refrain for my one with Malcolm goes something along these lines. And you all know I can't sing, but just bear with me. Malcolm X was a strong black man. Malcolm X said the struggles for land, self-determination for black people now, by any means necessary was his vow. And then I went on through a biographical sketch of his life, what they would call rap today, and he started something like this. He was born, Malcolm Little, on the 19th day, 1925, the month was May. He was born up south in Omaha, Nebraska. Even before his birth, there was much disaster around his father's home. The Klan did ride. Mama and children were alone inside because the Reverend Little was away that night. The Klan got away without a fight. And then I went on to unfold the story about Malcolm X for the students. I told about how the family moved to Lansing, Michigan, and Malcolm's father bought a house, and there was trouble again because Malcolm's parents, his mother and father, were both part of the UNIA, Marcus Garvey's organization, and they were targeted. And then something very, very, very awful happened. When Malcolm was 6, he took a deep, long breath. It was whispered, his father had just been beaten to death, attacked by white racists, and thrown across the tracks because he stood up for what Garvey taught about blacks. His mother was distraught. She was sent to a state mental institution. The state broke up the home, separated the children. But despite it all, Malcolm persevered. He was smart. We're talking about someone who was very, very intelligent. He was even made class president. But when asked in school what he wished to be. A lawyer, Malcolm said quite proudly. His teacher looked at him and said, "You're out of your mind. A simpler type of work you had better find." The audacity, what they do to our youth. They did it yesterday, they do it today. They dash our hope. They crush our dreams. It's the first step towards leading our youth down the school to prison pipeline. Malcolm was discouraged. From that point on, lost interest in school, and the 8th grade was gone. He traveled to Boston to live with his sister Ella, became a shoeshine boy and a hip slick fella. Malcolm learned how to hustle, how to make a quick buck, caught the train to Harlem and thought he found luck. Well, we all know he did not find luck. At least he didn't find good luck. He found bad luck. He began to break in houses. He began to sell drugs. We all know how that story ends. We know how it ended yesterday, and we know how it ends today. He ended up in jail, in prison. At first in prison, Malcolm acted really mean. They called him Satan because he made an evil scene. But a few years later, he took a long, serious look in the prison library and checked out a book. Malcolm hadn't read a book since the 8th grade, but he copied down the words. Page after page, after the dim prison lights were out in his cell, Malcolm read until his eyes were no longer well. And the story goes on to talk about what he read. He read about Africa and its ancient glories. He went through the books and read many stories. He went through the dictionary and learned much knowledge. And later on, he would think he had been to college. And the elders came to him and they took him aside and they taught him the right path, similar to what they do in prison today. The elders take the young brothers by the side and they try to teach them, set them along the right path. And one of the elders and his brother also was telling them about the Nation of Islam and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And Malcolm wrote Elijah and the messenger wrote black. And he taught them facts about whites and blacks and told him about all the things that we need to do to uplift our people and uplift our race. So when Malcolm left jail in 1952, he changed his ways. He had work to do. He smoked no cigarettes, sold no dope, because being a Muslim gave him hope. And then my story goes on, and Malcolm becomes a Muslim minister in the Nation of Islam, and he establishes temples all over and proselytizes the Muhammad Speaks newspaper. And he often talked on street corners, in the bars, and to the hustlers with the fine, flashy cars. And he rapped to black youth with respect in their eyes as he showed how integration seemed like slavery in disguise. Malcolm spoke of self-defense and independent land, about human rights that blacks must demand. He became a great leader. Very busy was his life. He made fiery speeches, now had children and a wife. But it was later found out that the vicious FBI joined black groups to destroy and spy. Soon the once strong movement became infiltrated. Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X were soon separated. So Malcolm traveled to Mecca and Ghana then came back to Harlem to found the OAAU. He said, fighting for just civil rights would not let us rise to win our struggle internationalized. So of course, Malcolm was assassinated. About to make a speech, Malcolm faced his doom up on stage of Harlem's Audubon Ballroom. And that reminds me when Miriam Makeba wrote this little song, and she said, do you remember Malcolm? Do you remember him? Malcolm, oh brother, Malcolm, he was a great man. Oh yeah, everybody talked about what a great man Malcolm X was. Oh my goodness, all of the children, talking about, I am Malcolm X, I am Malcolm X, I am Malcolm X. I am so very thrilled, Baba Lumumba, that you are keeping on the tradition. I'm so very thrilled with A. Peter Bailey. We're talking about people who walked with Malcolm, Herman Ferguson, people who walked with Malcolm, and Mario Obedelli, Gaidi Obedelli, people who walked with them, that generation, and then down to my generation who seeks to teach the things that I learned to the younger people. And then the next generation, those younger people, they too will stand up and say, I am Malcolm X.
Our next guest is a brother who really represents the leadership, the younger generation that we've been talking about. And also he represents it in a way that Malcolm has talked about, the question of black unity. There's something that was called United Black Front, or MBUF, that attempts to bring black people together, to unify black people. This brother is in that vein. This brother has worked very hard for a long time to actually produce the kind of unity we need to be functional and be effective as a people. Brother Salim has been in this community, for the last at least 10 years that I've known him. And, you know, we want him to tell us what he felt Malcolm meant to him. So, Brother Salim.
Asante Sana Baba for all of the kind words. It's really appreciated. For me, El Haj Malik El Shabazz, commonly known as Malcolm X, Brother Omawali, means many things, but there are three things actually that stick out to me. One that is most near and dear to me was fatherhood. I didn't grow up with my biological father. I had some good male role models in the house, but when I became aware of Malcolm X, that was like being a father for me that I was longing for, that kind of gave me the understanding of what it means to be a man. So manhood really sticks out for me when it comes to Malcolm X. And then some of the principles of self-determination that he exhibited in terms of his organizing, helping to build institutions in our community. So I knew that I wanted to be like Malcolm X once I got knowledge of self. He traveled the country building mosques for the Nation of Islam, so I wanted to be able to go to places and help build institutions. And now, as where I sit as a commissioner in Washington, D.C. in Ward 8, I think this is where I really have to look at what Malcolm X discussed in many of his speeches. One in the Ballad of the Bullet, he talked about the political philosophy of black nationalism. He talked about the economic philosophy of black nationalism and the social aspect of black nationalism. And so I like to look at myself as looking at his teachings and seeing how I can incorporate that into what I'm doing. So when he talked about the political philosophy of black nationalism, he said that we must re-educate our community as to what politics and politicians are supposed to deliver. And in my first term as a commissioner, I look back at some of those things and I say, okay, as an organization, we had to become astute at some of these teachings, and then seeing how we can organize around those things as some of the organizations I've been a part of. And so then they help politicize many people. I was one of those people, and then wanted to help finance a person that could run. And once again, I happened to be one person that could be financed, as well as other brothers and sisters like Chokwe Lumumba, Republic of New Africa, or like Ras Baraka in Newark, New Jersey, or Charles Barrett in New York City. And so I got elected, and then then getting into that seat, and then my responsibility to the community, to the people who helped get me there, is to make sure that I can bring resources back to them and not just be somebody in that seat. And then how can I help other people get into that space so that we can see state power? The goal of a revolutionary is for land. That's what Malcolm said in the message to the grassroots. And so being in this space, I try to figure out how can I help many of our sisters and brothers and some of our organizations get access to the resources that we need. And so looking back at what Malcolm discussed in terms of the political philosophy of black nationalism, I like to look at myself as following his guidance and leadership and doing some of those things as a commissioner. Thank you.
Peace and blessings. It's my pleasure to share a few thoughts with you concerning Brother Malcolm and Pan-Africanism. Interestingly enough, Malcolm is viewed similarly to Du Bois, in the sense that the Pan-Africanism of both figures is undercovered or even rarely covered at all. A lot of folks talk about Du Bois and talk about Malcolm, but often leave out the Pan-Africanism that they articulated, that they practiced. So I wanted to touch upon Malcolm's Pan-Africanism for this year's commemoration of his birthday. And it's kind of interesting because if you look at both Du Bois and Malcolm, they are known in part, in very small part, for a few popular phrases or phrases that have been popularized. Du Bois, of course, articulated that the challenge of the 20th century would be that of the color line, and Malcolm is often emblazoned with the words "by any means necessary." And interestingly enough, both phrases come out of a Pan-African context. They weren't initially located in a strictly U.S. National political context. Of course, Du Bois coming out of the Pan-African Conference of the early 1900s. It was when he first articulated that a challenge of the 20th century would be that of the color line. And Malcolm, by any means necessary, drew from the 1958 All African People's Conference in Accra, where there was a major discussion among different factions at the conference. Kwame Nkrumah represented a faction that was pursued a non-violent path for liberation, for removing the yoke of colonialism. While on the other hand, you had Fanon, who was deeply embedded in the Algerian Revolution in their fight against the French. And of course, that was anything but non-violent. The only means that was available to the Algerians and was a violent resistance. And so Fanon brought that element to the table at the All African People's Conference in Accra in 1958, and challenged the organizers that violence was an option and a necessary option, and that nonviolence wasn't sufficient and couldn't be applied in all cases, and particularly not in the case in the Algerian struggle for liberation against the French. And so a main element of the conference was this declaration that African states were going to be seeking liberation both by violent means and non-violent means, in essence, by any means necessary. So Malcolm and Du Bois, huge Pan-Africanists, and for anyone to talk about them really without talking about Pan-Africanism would be doing a disservice to their lives. Now, I'm going to take the argument about Malcolm's Pan-Africanism a little bit further, and that is to say that at the center of Malcolm's Pan-Africanism was the Congo. Congo was central to Malcolm's not only articulation of Pan-Africanism, but also his practice of Pan-Africanism. Of course, symbolically, and Malcolm firmly ensconced his organization after he left the nation, the Organization of Afro-American Unity in a Pan-African context. He took the name really from the Organization of African Unity. So the Organization of Afro-American Unity was an extension or the U.S. corollary to the Organization of African Unity that was established on the African continent in 1963. Now, in the last year of his life, really can be entitled or dubbed the Pan-African Year, because Malcolm spent a tremendous amount of time on the African continent, visiting a host of countries. He had gone to the continent in 1964 several times, visited a number of countries, met with major Pan-African figures from Touré of Guinea, Nkrumah of Ghana, Nasser of Egypt, Nyerere of Tanzania, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Bote of Uganda. These are figures that Malcolm met with, not just in a symbolic way, but to discuss ways in which the Africans at home can connect and work with Africans abroad to bring about total liberation, total freedom of the African continent and of Africans abroad. He lobbied the organization. He went to Ethiopia and lobbied the Organization of African Unity, the OAU, to intervene at the United Nations to raise the question of the brutality that was being committed against black folks in the United States at the international level. That was a very specific pursuit of Malcolm in his travels throughout the African continent, for the African leaders to embrace and elevate the struggle for freedom and liberation of Africans in the United States to the international level, to make it an international issue, a human rights issue, not just a civil rights issue. And this is, of course, emblematic of Malcolm in terms of he articulated ideas and prescriptions rhetorically, but more importantly, he followed up in a concrete way. So that was one of the key pursuits of Malcolm as he traveled to different countries on the African continent in 1964 and met with different heads of states and met with different Pan-Africanists. Now, a second key pursuit of Malcolm during his travels was, of course, the Congo and the case of the Congo and the seeking justice for the assassination of Lumumba. He knew that the United States, the Belgians, the CIA had collaborated and to rid the continent of rid the Congo and the continent of Lumumba. Lumumba, whom Malcolm said was the greatest African to ever walk the continent. He felt that Lumumba was totally committed to the freedom and liberation of Congolese and Africans, and he couldn't be reached. He couldn't be bought off by the imperialists. And Malcolm also saw Congo as strategically located, being in the heart of the African continent. He felt that if the Congo was controlled by nationalists and Pan-Africanists, then it could serve as a launching pad for dismantling other colonial regimes in Southern Africa, Angola and Rhodesia and of course Namibia and South Africa. So Malcolm saw the liberation of the African continent inextricably linked to the liberation of the Congo. And he wasn't the only one, of course. Probably most prominently was Kwame Nkrumah, who saw Congo as central to the liberation of the African continent. He laid that out in exquisite detail in the book Challenge of the Congo. So here you have two huge Pan-Africanists of the time, one on the continent at home, Kwame Nkrumah, who saw Congo as central to the liberation of the African continent. And then you have Malcolm here on this side of the Atlantic, who saw Congo as central to the liberation of the African continent. So that's the next step that I'm taking Malcolm's Pan-Africanism, in that Malcolm was a staunch Pan-Africanist. He articulated Pan-Africanism rhetorically, but he also put it to practice. He sought to, when he traveled to different countries on the African continent, and when he articulated and tried to the need for Congo to be free and liberated, and tried to mobilize support for the Congolese, he also made it clear to the African heads of states that he said, basically, listen, we have a lot of skilled men here in the United States who are former military, and they are ready to come and fight in the liberation movement in the Congo. And it's believed that Malcolm and Che Guevara, who went to the Congo in 1965 to fight with the Congolese, because Che saw and Castro saw Congo as central to the anti-imperial fight. That, in fact, Che said that victory in the Congo will be consequential not only for the Congo, but for Africa as a whole. And saw Congo, the struggle in the Congo, not only as solely as a Congolese struggle, but a worldwide struggle. So Malcolm is mobilizing resources to send to the resistance fighters in the Congo who were fighting against, of course, the Congolese elites, fighting against the Belgians, were fighting against mercenaries that were brought in by the United States. In fact, the United States recruited Cuban, anti-Castro Cuban mercenaries from Florida to go and fight in the Congo. So it was a global fight at the time, and Malcolm was keenly aware of that. And if you follow his speeches, he almost always talked about Lumumba, almost always talked about the Congo when it came to international issues or issues on the African continent. In fact, when he had gone to Oxford to do the debate at Oxford, he spent a substantial portion of his speech talking about Congo and really lambasting Moise Tshombe, one of the traders in the Congo who was responsible for the killing of Lumumba. So just wanted to take this brief moment to share with you that not only was Malcolm a staunch Pan-Africanist, but the center of his Pan-Africanism was freedom and liberation of the Congo, and saw that Congo, a free and liberated Congo, would serve as a trigger, let's say, as Fanon said, a trigger for the liberation of the African continent. Fanon put it best. He said, the continent is shaped like a gun, and the trigger is the Congo. You pull that trigger and it sets off a combustion that would ignite the entire African continent. And Fanon, Nkrumah, Malcolm all subscribed to the centrality of the Congo as it relates to freedom and liberation of the African continent. And it's in that spirit that we at Friends of the Congo are continuing the struggle for a free and liberated Congo, continuing the struggle in the spirit of Nkrumah, continuing the struggle in the spirit of Fanon, continuing the struggle in the spirit of Malcolm.
Alrighty, this brings us to that part of our program where I we kind of sum up what has been said, but we also add the other elements that we feel were important to talk about. Some of these have been talked about and some of them haven't. But it's very important, you know, in this kind of wrap-up session, this kind of a summary of what this leadership means. And, you know, you've heard from other people. Now I want to talk about some other aspects of it. The first one I want to talk about is his message. What do we mean by his message? Why are we talking about his message and his leadership at the same time? Well, you know, without the powerful message that Malcolm gave us, he would not have been as effective leader. Much of what we saw, sure, he had the ability to project it, he reflected intelligence, he reflected, he was articulate, etc., but he had a message that resonated. It's interesting enough, it resonated with people who didn't agree to it or didn't want to agree to it or who resisted it because they understood it was the truth. Malcolm was a nationalist, and he always defined himself as a black nationalist. In other words, he was a person who believed that separation was really the only answer, that creating our own entity was ultimately the only answer, that we couldn't and shouldn't look for this society to, you know, to give us our freedom within the context of this society. He was a out-of-the-box thinker. And when we think of the box, we're talking about the Western world, America, the white man's world, as being the box. Malcolm was outside of that box, so he analyzed it from a position of a person outside the box, not in the box. His chief competitor for thinking at the time, of course, was Dr. King, who was really a person who was in the box, who really defined the solution to the problem as being freeing ourselves within the box, within the confines of the system, pointing out the system's contradiction, asking the system to treat us better, demanding at times, but trying to get better treatment in the system. So when we say out of the, that's what we mean. His message, Malcolm's message, was one of independence. You can't separate him from that message. That message has a long history, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But the other aspect of him that we need to understand is his family background. His family background. Why was that important? And if you can't read it, his parents, who his parents were. If Malcolm's parents had not been Garveyites, had not instilled in him the notion of independence being the solution, that black people's accumulative power being some, the message from Garvey, the message was we must have a power base strong enough to protect our interest, probably on the continent of Africa, but big enough and strong enough to protect our interest wherever as a solution. Without that as a basis, foundation, he may never have been able to connect with Elijah Muhammad. But when he connected, interesting enough, even when he connected with Elijah Muhammad, who was also a former Garveyite, they came from the same base. So his family giving him that tradition, providing that framework, that frame of reference outside the box, was instrumental in his leadership. It was instrumental in him formulating the message and taking that message to heart. It wasn't just a matter of him saying it, but he had lived it all his life. His father was, in fact, a Garveyite. His mother was, in fact, a Garveyite. Another aspect of his leadership was his ability to follow. Now, why would I call that an attribute here? Well, as it turns out, if you're going to be a good leader, it's very helpful to have been a good follower. Because being a good follower, you begin to understand what a follower needs. A fourth aspect of his tremendous leadership ability and his ability to reach us really was the role he played in his own family. That is to say, he projected that of a good husband and a good father. you know, which is an image that we all need. We all need, as men especially, we need to know what it means and to feel that those roles, the roles of fathers, the roles of husbands, the roles of how one treats one's wife, how one relates to one's wife, how one relates to one's children is extremely important. It's certainly important in being a leader. Leaders should always have that. They should be role models in terms of their own family. We heard people on other tapes talk about that. We heard people talk about how important that was to them. So that was an important part of his leadership ability, was to project the image of a strong father and a loving father and a loving husband. A fifth, well, let me write down, strong father and husband. A fifth quality of Malcolm's leadership was his ability to identify with the masses of our people. That is to say, he never looked down on any black person. He always had the capacity to love and to respect the masses of our people. He came from that. He experienced some of their trials and tribulations. So in addition to just being able to sympathize with black people, he actually was able to empathize with them, and that came across with Malcolm. It came his ability to empathize, his ability to identify with black people who have all kinds of problems, drug problems, crime problems, you know, problems of alcoholism, problems of homelessness, his ability to actually identify, to put himself in their place was outstanding. And it came across to Malcolm. It came across to him because he had experienced many of those things. The loss of his father at a young age, going into an orphanage, going into foster homes, these are things that Malcolm understood and was able to identify. This gave him a powerful leg up on many other leaders. He wasn't just talking it, he was feeling it, he was expressing it. You could see it in him. You could see his ability to identify with the struggles that our people have, and how that identification motivated him to push on, to be the courageous person, to be the leader that we knew and understood that Malcolm was. Another aspect of him, which is interesting and is kind of related, is his knowledge of world affairs. His knowledge of world affairs was outstanding. Malcolm knew a lot about what was going on in the world. It was said that he consumed 5 or 6 newspapers every day. Malcolm used his time, it's interesting enough, because he used his time in jail to actually study. So in many ways it's kind of interesting, because Malcolm's jail time was almost like his college time. It was almost like where he made certain connections, where he developed himself, where he was able to see and identify with that and develop his own capacity, through reading, through knowledge. His jail time was almost like his. If he were said to be part of the talented 10th, it wouldn't be because he went to college. It would be because he spent some time in jail, and he took that time to use to develop himself, to learn about world affairs, to take the lessons of his father, to connect with Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, to become himself, to become the person that became valuable to us. A lot of that happened in jail. A lot of that happened as a product of him being in jail. He also had an inclusive approach. When I say inclusive, what do I mean? Malcolm, even though he was a dedicated Muslim, he was a dedicated member of the Nation of Islam, a follower of Elijah Muhammad, never projected that dogmatically as the only road to black liberation. Malcolm was always willing to work with other people who understood and had the same vision he had. That is to say, that it's going to take a lot of different approaches. That when we are free, we won't be one religion, we won't be one philosophy. We'll be a diverse people who have in common their blackness, have in common their identity that preceded colonialism and slavery. Malcolm always understood that. He always understood that that was important, that being inclusive amongst black people. And when I say inclusive, I don't mean that everything that every black person believes. He did not believe in integration, for example. He did not believe in assimilation. He believed in separatism. So that inclusion meant everybody who believed in that, everybody who understood that the society in which we live in, the society in which confines us, the society that oppressed us, is not the society we can also seek to provide us freedom. When you understood that, he wanted you to be a part of him. He created both the Muslim Mosque Incorporated after he left the Nation of Islam and the Afro-American Association of Afro-American Unity. One was religious in nature and one was political in nature. One was broad because he understood he had to work with people. So Malcolm's inclusiveness was a very important aspect of his leadership. Very important. Another aspect of Malcolm's leadership was his focus on black people. I'll put focus on us. Malcolm focused on elevating this plight of black people. He did not focus on eliminating class in the world. He did not focus on solving all the world's problems. He focused on taking black people from the position in which we held at the bottom and moving us up, raising us up, elevating us, making us strong, making us competitive, putting us in a position of strength as a people. So one of his characteristics, one of the things that he projected, one of his leadership was just that, a focus on black people. Even though he could identify with other people like the Chinese and other people, he understood that his focus had to be on black people, not on solving the world's problems. This was an attribute. This was a characteristic of his leadership that was very, very, very important. The other thing, let me say, that we want to talk about is his anti-elitist posture. And we alluded to that a little bit before. He was anti-elitist. Let's see, where do I go? Anti-elitist. Why do I say anti-elitist? We had these. We've always had this battle in the black community. The people who go to college, or Du Bois's notion of talented tenth, for example, that somehow we're going to be saved by those people who are our talented tenth, or by implication, those people who go to college are going to save us. Well, Malcolm's very posture, a person who only went to the 8th grade, a person who spent some of his life as a thug, as a sort of a gangsterish kind of person at one point in his life, rose to become the most outstanding leader we've probably ever seen. How did this happen? How did this person who was clearly not born as part of the talented 10th in the classic sense of the term become such a great leader? But what happened as a result of that is it proved that not only was that possible, it maybe even suggested that our leadership should come from that group of people. That ultimately we may depend on those people who we don't see as the talented 10 as being ultimately our leader. That Malcolm's very presence, his very ability suggests that. We're not saying that, you know, the talented 10th or those people who go to college aren't important to us. We're saying they don't necessarily come with the message that will solve our problem. The idea of becoming a part of this system is not necessarily going to solve our problem. We know that now in days of Barack Obama. We saw Barack Obama, who's clearly part of the talented 10th, become president of the United States, and we ended up with Donald Trump. So Malcolm was the epitome of the notion that maybe we need to look to the masses of our people, not our talented 10th, as our salvation. So that is an important part of his leadership. Now, one of the things I want to talk about also about Malcolm is his ability to be a mentor. Malcolm's effect was so much more profound than we generally think of it. For example, we know how important Muhammad Ali was. But the reality is that without a Malcolm X, there probably would not have been a Muhammad Ali. Malcolm X was his mentor. Malcolm X gave him the courage he needed to do much of what he needed to do. The understanding, the courage, and the strength that he needed to be the Muhammad Ali that we said, not as a boxer, but as somebody who would resist the system, somebody who would not go to Vietnam, somebody who would come back and win and triumph over all of that. A lot of that can be placed at the feet of Brother Malcolm X. Also, when we think of the Nation of Islam was something that Malcolm was instrumental, not in establishing, but in developing, in bringing to its full fruition, bringing to generating what it became. All of these things are connected. Malcolm stands at the kind of the middle of all this development, all of this understanding of these things. You know, we can look at a lot of things. We can look at many of our courageous activities, many of the courageous people, the people in the South, etc., who derive strength from Malcolm. A lot of things that we don't think about and attribute to him are actually fundamentally his. For example, I come out of the state of California, and one of the groups that came out of California was something called the Afro-American Association. The Afro-American Association, which Marilanica Ringer was a part of, and Bobby Seale was a part of, and Ron Dellins was a part of, and my brother was a part of, and I was a part of, and a lot of people, almost everybody in California that you know of, came out of the Afro-American Association. Well, how did the Afro-American Association get formed? Well, it got formed because Malcolm was not allowed to speak at the University of California at Berkeley. That provided the impetus for developing the students at Berkeley and at Merritt College and other people to come together under the leadership of Donald Worden to develop the Afro-American Association. Out of that came even the Panthers, even Kwanzaa came out of that. People who would join that group went on to do so many different other things. And that the reality is that if it wasn't for the University of California refusing to allow Malcolm to speak on campus, we may not have had the Afro-American Association and all that spawned from that association. So the power of this man, his leadership, is far more pervasive, if you will, far more impactful. And in the realization that everybody who reads his autobiography is transformed. We heard a sister earlier talking about it. Is transformed by that. So, you know, it's leadership we need to understand more. It's leadership we need to study. It's leadership that we need to emulate. It's leadership that we need to pass on to the next generation. So, thank you very much. And we'll see you next year for Kuzaliwa. Next year we'll still be talking about Malcolm. We'll still be trying to analyze not only his impact, but hopefully after this coronavirus thing, we'll be able to get back together and come together and celebrate it as a group rather than just simply doing a video. All right? Thank you very much.